Esmeralda Santiago's memoir, When I Was Puerto Rican, Part 2. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. Every day I walked home from school repeating those words. The broad streets and sidewalks that had impressed me so on the first day we had arrived had become as familiar as the dirt road from Macon to the highway. Only my curiosity about the people who lived behind these walls ended where the facades of the building opened into dark hallways or locked doors. Nothing good, I imagined, could be happening inside if so many locks had to be breached to go in or step out. It was on these tense walks home from school that I decided I had to get out of Brooklyn. Mammy had chosen this as our home, and just like every other time we'd moved, I had to go along with her because I was a child who had no choice. But I wasn't willing to go along with her on this one. How can people live like this? I shrieked once, desperate to run across a field, to feel grass under my feet instead of pavement. Like what? Mammy asked, looking around our apartment. The kitchen and living room crisscrossed with sagging lines of drying diapers and bedclothes. Everyone on top of each other. No room to do anything, no air. Do you want to go back to Macon to live like savages with no electricity, no toilets? At least you could step outside every day without somebody trying to kill you. Ay, Neji, stop exaggerating. I hate my life, I yelled. Then do something about it, she yelled back. Until Mr. Barone showed me the listing for Performing Arts High School, I hadn't known what to do. The auditions are in less than a month. You have to learn a monologue, which you will perform in front of a panel. If you do well and your grades here are good, you might get into the school. Mr. Barone took charge of preparing me for my audition to Performing Arts. He selected a speech from The Silver Cord, a play by Sidney Howard, first performed in 1926, but whose action took place in a New York City drawing room circa 1905. Mr. Gaddy, the English teacher, he said, will coach you, and Mrs. Johnson will talk to you about what to wear and things like that. I was to play Christina, a young married woman confronting her mother-in-law. I learned the monologue phonetically from Mr. Gaddy. It opened with, "You belong to a type that's very common in this country, Mrs. Phelps. A type of self-centered, self-pitying, sun-devouring tigress with unmentionable proclivities suppressed on the side." "We don't have time to study the meaning of every word," Mr. Gaddy said. "Just make sure you pronounce every word correctly." Mrs. Johnson, who taught home economics, called me to her office. "Is that how you enter a room?" she asked the minute I came in. "Try again, only this time, don't barge in. Step in, slowly. Head up, back straight, a nice smile on your face. That's it." I took a deep breath and waited. "Now sit." "No, not like that. Don't just plop down. Float down to the chair with your knees together." Notice these verbs. Plop and float again. Just like the women in the pageant floated across the stage. Mrs. Johnson is telling Esmeralda Santiago to float down to the chair. She demonstrated, and I copied her. "That's better. What do you do with your hands?" "No, don't hold your chin like that. It's not ladylike. Put your hands on your lap and leave them there. Don't use them so much when you talk." I sat stiff as a cutout while Mrs. Johnson and Mr. Barone asked me questions they thought the panel at Performing Arts would ask. Where are you from? Puerto Rico. No, Mrs. Johnson said. Puerto Rico. Keep your R's soft. Try again. Do you have any hobbies? Mr. Barone asked. Now I knew what to answer. I enjoy dancing and the movies. Why do you want to come to this school? Mrs. Johnson and Mr. Barone had worked on my answer if this question should come up. I would like to study at Performing Arts because of its academic program and so that I may be trained as an actress. Very good, very good. Mr. Barone rubbed his hands together, twinkled his eyes at Mrs. Johnson. I think we have a shot at this. Remember, Mrs. Johnson said, when you shop for your audition dress, look for something very simple in dark colors. Mammy bought me a red plaid wool jumper with a crisp white shirt, my first pair of stockings, and penny loafers. The night before, she rolled my hair in pink curlers that cut into my scalp and made it hard to sleep. For the occasion, I was allowed to wear eye makeup and a little lipstick. You look so grown up, Mammy said, her voice sad but happy, as I twirled in front of her and Tata. Toda una señorita, Tata said, her eyes misty. We set out for the audition on an overcast January morning, heavy with the threat of snow. Why couldn't you choose a school close to home? Mammy grumbled as we got on the train to Manhattan. I worried that even if I were accepted, she wouldn't let me go because it was so far from home, 1 hour each way by subway. But in spite of her complaints, she was proud that I was good enough to be considered for such a famous school. And she actually seemed excited that I would be leaving the neighborhood. You'll be exposed to a different class of people, she assured me. And I felt the force of her ambition without knowing exactly what she meant. 3 women sat behind a long table in a classroom, where the desks and chairs had been pushed against a wall. As I entered, I held my head up and smiled, and then I floated down to the chair in front of them, clasped my hands on my lap, and smiled some more. Good morning, said the tall one with hair the color of sand. She was big-boned and solid, with intense blue eyes, a generous mouth, and soothing hands with short fingernails. She was dressed in shades of beige from head to toe and wore no makeup and no jewelry except for the gold chain that held her glasses just above her full bosom. Her voice was rich, modulated, each word pronounced as if she were inventing it. Next to her sat a very small woman with very high heels. Her cropped hair was poofed around her face, with bangs brushing the tips of her long, false lashes. Her huge, dark brown eyes were thickly lined in black all around, and her small mouth was carefully drawn in and painted cerise. Her suntan face turned toward me with innocent curiosity of a lively baby. She was dressed in black with many gold chains around her neck, big earrings, several bracelets, and large stone rings on the fingers of both hands. The third woman was tall, small-boned, thin but shapely. Her dark hair was pulled flat against her skull into a knot in the back of her head. Her face was all angles and light, with fawn-like dark brown eyes, a straight nose, full lips painted just a shade pinker than their natural color. Silky forest green cuffs peeked out from the sleeves of her burgundy suit. Diamond studs winked from perfect earlobes. I always liked this personification of the diamond studs winking from perfect earlobes. Pay attention to how much time Santiago spends describing each of these three women. Why do you think their physical descriptions and their characterization is important to developing the element of change in this memoir? I had dreamed of this moment for several weeks. More than anything, I wanted to impress the panel with my talent so I would be accepted into the performing arts and leave Brooklyn. And I hoped one day I would never go back. But the moment I faced these three impeccably groomed women, I forgot my English and Mrs. Johnson's lessons on how to behave like a lady. In the agony of trying to answer their barely comprehensible questions, I jabbed my hands here and there, forming words with my fingers because the words refused to leave my mouth. "Why don't you let us hear your monologue now?" the woman with the dangling glasses asked softly. I stood up abruptly, and my chair clattered onto its side 2 feet from where I stood. I picked it up, wishing with all my strength that a thunderbolt would strike me dead to ashes on the spot. "It's all right," she said. "Take a deep breath. We know you're nervous." I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, walked to the middle of the room, and began my monologue. "You belong to a type that's very common in this country, Mrs. Phillips. A type of sloven, red self-pity and Sunday boring tigress with a mention a ball proclivities on D side." In spite of Mr. Gaddy's reminders that I should speak slowly and enunciate every word, even if I didn't understand it, I recited my 3-minute monologue in 1 minute flat. The small woman's long lashes seemed to have grown with amazement. The elegant woman's serene face twitched with controlled laughter. The tall one, dressed in beige, smiled sweetly. "Thank you, dear," she said. "Could you wait outside for a few moments?" I resisted the urge to curtsy. The long hallway had narrow wainscoting halfway up to the high ceiling. Single bulb lamps hung from long cords, creating yellow puddles of light on the polished brown linoleum tile. A couple of girls my age sat on straight chairs next to their mothers, waiting their turn. They looked up as I came out of the door. They looked up as I came out, and the door shut behind me. Mammy stood up from her chair at the end of the hall. She looked as scared as I felt. "What happened?" "Nothing," I mumbled, afraid that if I began to tell her about it, I would break into tears in front of the other people, whose eyes followed me and Mammy as we walked to the exit sign. "I have to wait here a minute." "Did they say anything?" "No, I'm just supposed to wait." We leaned against the wall. Across from us there was a bulletin board with newspaper clippings about former students. On the ragged edge, a neat person had printed in blue ink, P.A., and the year the actor, dancer, or musician had graduated. I closed my eyes and tried to picture myself on that bulletin board, with PA 66 across the top. The door at the end of the hall opened, and the woman in beige poked her head out. "Esmeralda?" "See, I mean here." I raised my hand. She led me into the room. There was another girl in there whom she introduced as Bonnie, a junior at the school. "Do you know what a pantomime is?" the woman asked. I nodded. "You and Bonnie are sisters, decorating a Christmas tree." Bonnie looked a lot like Juanita Martin, whom I had last seen in Macun 4 years earlier. We decided the invisible Christmas tree would be, and we sat on the floor and pretended we were taking decorations out of boxes and hanging them on the